Hello, and welcome to the second video in our series. This one's called Understanding Instructions. Basically, we're going to try to make sense out of instructions that just don't seem to make sense. Okay, the first step in the process is not to panic. All panicking does is waste time. You're going to be doing difficult things in graduate school. That's why you're here. So I always encourage students to look at each one of these activities when you're faced with something new and daunting as an opportunity to expand your CV or your LinkedIn profile, because you're going to be asked to do things like creating webinars and hosting presentations that are actual skills that you're going to need for management positions. The second step is to read the instructions all the way through. Don't try to analyze anything, don't try to interpret anything, just get through the instructions. Give yourself a break and then go through them again. The second time you read the instructions, this is when you should start highlighting or underlining things that you don't understand. And I usually will try to create a list of those things so that I can focus on what I'm going to research or what I'm going to ask about so that I fully understand the instructions. So now that you know what you don't know, as Donald Rumsfeld would say, it's time to figure out what those items on your list of things that you don't understand actually mean. So there are two approaches to take. One is you can ask your instructor. And this is particularly helpful if you already understand what all the terms mean, but you just don't get what they're asking about. So for instance, if you read a set of instructions and you can interpret the instructions in 2 or 3 or 5 different ways, asking your instructor is going to be the best way to figure out which way they mean, because that's not something you're going to be able to find in the NAU library or using Google. Also, if you find that you have a difficult time phrasing the question, this is also a good time to talk to your instructor, because if you don't know how to phrase it, it's going to be really hard to do a search for it. Now, the other way to find your answers is doing research, and this is a great opportunity to stretch those or to work those research muscles. Research is an active learning process, and so you're going to learn a lot more by doing research than by simply going to your instructor. It's kind of that teaching a man to fish versus giving a man a fish. So by researching something, you are going to be reading through many sources. You're going to be looking for explanations that appeal to you and discarding explanations that don't work for you. It's also a good way to start building the research that you need to complete the assignment. Another time that research is particularly helpful is if you're trying to learn a concept that has a visual basis. So for instance, APA format. If you don't know what APA format is, you can call your instructor and ask them, but it's something that you really can't explain to somebody on the phone. You actually have to see it. So if you don't know what APA format is, just Google APA format, and I guarantee you're going to find hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands of hits on Google that will show you what APA citation is. Another great place to look for something like this would be the NAU library, looking for sample papers, and my favorite resource of all time, which is YouTube. I'm including this slide into the presentation because I think it's a really important point to make that a lot of students don't consider. And that is, sometimes you just need to take a break from your work. Maybe you're working on an accounting problem or you're working on a paper and you've stared at the instructions for 30 minutes, for an hour, for 2 hours. You've looked things up in the library, you've looked things up in Google, you've emailed your instructor, and you've just hit a wall. Step back, take a break. This is about working smarter, not harder. The research shows that optimally our brain will function at its best for about 52 minutes, then it needs a break. And in fact, the more of these cycles that you go through, the shorter that that optimal period becomes. So you go from 52 minutes to 45 minutes to 40 minutes to 30 minutes. So you've got to take a break. And sometimes the best thing that you can do to work through a problem is to just not look at it for a while. Or get a second opinion. Ask somebody else, like, what does this mean to you? Or what do you see when you look at this problem? Move on to a different assignment or move on to a different subject altogether. Read a book, take a walk, take your dog on a walk, take a nap, have a pizza. We all need to get away from an assignment sometimes. And what I find is that oftentimes when you first look at an assignment, you might get the spark of an idea of what you think the problem is about. And you may stick with that spark, but that spark could be completely wrong, and you won't see it if you're looking at the problem hour after hour. Sometimes the only way to get past that and to open yourself to new ideas completely is to get away. This slide contains a set of sample instructions. This is actually from an assignment that we offered in the first learning plan of a class that used to be one of the first courses in the program. So realistically, a student who was in their first quarter, this would be one of the first assignments they ever came across. And if you read it, there are some things here that don't really jump out or might not jump out as being absolutely clear. For instance, if you're not familiar with APA, the fact that it is an APA research paper might stand out, or the idea of leadership theories or scholarly literature. So take a moment, pause this video, read through the instructions, and look at the notes that I added. Also, what are some notes that you might add if you were looking at this instructions for the first time? So this might be a good practice exercise for you to work through a set of instructions that might be a little bit daunting for a new student. Here's a short quiz based on the last slide. Pause the video and see if you can answer these questions. Okay, so at this point you understand the instructions, you've answered all the questions. One important element that students often miss is what I'm going to call in this particular presentation the approach. In other presentations in the advanced writing series, I'll discuss terms that are more commonly used, such as rhetorical mode or method of development, but in this beginning video, I'm going to use the approach because basically it's what kind of approach does your instructor want you to take to the paper? Do they want it to be a persuasive paper? Do they want you to provide an analysis? Do they just want a historical recounting of something? So this is something that you have to be conscious of as you write, because like an airplane flight, if the flight all goes very well but you completely screw up the landing, you cannot call that a successful flight. If you write a paper and your writing mechanics look good, the flow is there, you've answered all the questions, but you're writing a historical paper when your instructor actually wants a persuasive paper, then your paper, again, is not a success. So don't lose focus of what the reader wants, and in this case, the reader is your instructor. And I recommend using your instructions as a checklist so that you can compare your first draft to what the instructions say, and you can literally check off on the instructions, yes, I've done this, yes, I've done that, yes, I have the right approach. The last slide had an airplane, this one has a parachute, and the message that I'm trying to get to through here is that you're not alone in this. You do have a support team. Your first line of support should be your instructor, because they are subject matter experts and they do teach the class. They are going to be very knowledgeable both in the content and what the assignments are. But in addition, you can also contact your advisors, and there's an email address here that you can use to contact your advisor in case you don't know who your advisor is. Your advisors can help guide you to other sources if you need help with tutoring, but also if you need a second set of eyes, somebody to read through instructions and give you their interpretation. The advisors are a good source as well. Now, bear in mind they may not have experience in your background, but they do have good critical thinking skills, and so they might be a good second opinion. Smart Thinking is an online tutoring service that's available in the D2L classroom. It is not going to be effective in all classes, but it is good for things like if you need help with proofreading and with your writing skills. The librarians are available to help you with research, and you can use the Ask a Librarian function in the NAU library. Also, we have Dr. Salinas, who is available in the writing lab, and he does have office hours, and he's also available by appointment. Finally, if you live within a driving distance of a ground campus, in some cases we can arrange for tutoring at the local campuses. Now, bear in mind that all the ground campuses are undergraduate only, so there's no guarantee that they're going to have a tutor who is able to teach at the graduate level, but in some instances, like if you're taking stats through the graduate program, if they offer stats at the undergraduate program, we might be able to line up something for you. But you're never going to know unless you ask. So it's always worth just taking a couple of minutes to send that email to your advisors. Anyway, that concludes this video. Thank you for your time, and I'll see you in the next one.